RoboCop 3 is the film that killed a franchise, buried a director, and drove Frank Miller out of Hollywood for 14 years. Today, we're counting down 15 weird facts about RoboCop 3. Stick around for number 1, because Peter Weller came to tell the director personally why he was leaving, and what he said in that room is the most decent thing anyone did during this entire production. 15. Orion registered the title before RoboCop 2. Even opened 5 days before RoboCop 2 opened in theaters in June 1990. Orion Pictures was already planning the next film. The studio registered the titles for 2 prospective sequels, RoboCop 3 and RoboCop 4, with the Motion Picture Association of America before a single ticket had been sold for the second installment. The confidence behind that move was not unfounded. RoboCop 2 opened to solid numbers, and the franchise had proven itself as a reliable commercial property through toys, comic books, video games, and a children's animated series. Orion had turned RoboCop into a merchandise machine, and the studio wasn't about to slow down. By September 1990, a production chart announced that filming of the 3rd installment was expected to begin December 3rd of that year. The studio that was simultaneously planning its own bankruptcy couldn't move fast enough to make its RoboCop franchise. One of those plans worked out considerably better than the other. 14. The script was half of Frank Miller's discarded RoboCop. To draft, Frank Miller had been hired to write RoboCop 2, delivered a script, and watched it get rewritten into something he barely recognized. He came back for RoboCop 3 anyway, still hoping to get his ideas on screen. What ended up in RoboCop 3 was drawn largely from his original rejected draft of RoboCop 2, the urban displacement storyline, OCP forcing residents out of their homes using private military force, the donut shop sequence where every cop in the room draws their weapon. These were all Miller's ideas pulled from a script that had been passed over the first time around. Miller's new RoboCop 3 screenplay was then handed to director Fred Dekker, who rewrote it extensively. When Miller saw what the film had become, stripped of violence, stripped of edge, aimed at children, he left Hollywood. He did not return in any meaningful capacity until the 2007 film adaptation of his graphic novel, 300. His unproduced RoboCop 3 script was later published as a comic book series called RoboCop: The Last Stand. It ended far darker than anything the film allowed. 13. The director was hired because of 2 films that had already flopped. Fred Dekker got the RoboCop 3 job on the strength of Night of the Creeps and The Monster Squad, 2 films he had written and directed in the late 1980s that were beloved by genre fans and completely ignored by mainstream audiences at the time of their release. Both had flopped at the box office. Neither had received a DVD release. Orion brought him in because he understood genre filmmaking, could work with a constrained budget, and genuinely cared about the material. Dekker met with Orion, took on Frank Miller's script, rewrote it extensively under the studio's demands, and began production. He later described the job as one of the most difficult creative experiences of his career, not because of the filmmaking itself, but because of how completely the studio's requirements conflicted with every instinct he had about what the film should be. Night of the Creeps and The Monster Squad have since become cult classics. Neither of them killed his career. RoboCop 3 did. 12. The studio demanded a PG-13 rating from the start. Orion Pictures had built a lucrative merchandise business on the back of RoboCop, toys, action figures, a Saturday morning cartoon, and the studio had reached the conclusion that the franchise's actual audience was children. The decision to pursue a PG-13 rating for RoboCop 3 was not a creative one. It was a business directive handed to Fred Dekker before he had shot a single frame. The profanity was cut. The graphic violence that had defined the first 2 films was eliminated. References to drugs and prostitution were removed. The satirical darkness that Paul Verhoeven had used as a precision instrument in the original became collateral damage in the rating requirement. Dekker later acknowledged that he was handed a mandate directly contradicting everything that had made RoboCop worth making in the first place. He complied because he had no choice. A sequel to 2 of the most violently satirical films of the decade was produced specifically to be appropriate for the children who had been buying the toys. 11. Nancy Allen only came back to die. Nancy Allen had played Officer Ann Lewis in all three RoboCop films and was one of the franchise's most consistent presences. She wasn't happy about it by the time RoboCop 3 came around. Allen had been openly unhappy with how RoboCop 2 turned out. The tone, the direction, the way the character had been handled. She agreed to return for the third film on one condition: Lewis had to be killed. Allen was done with the franchise and made it a contractual requirement that her character would not survive the film. The production agreed. Lewis dies in the first act, killed by the villain McDaggett during a confrontation in Cadillac Heights. Her death is the inciting event that pushes RoboCop to join the resistance and sets the rest of the plot in motion. The only way Orion could get their most consistent supporting actress back on screen was to let her leave it permanently. She received second billing in the credits despite appearing in less of the film than Rip Torn. She has not returned to the franchise since. 10. Robert John Burke wore a suit built for someone else's body. When Peter Weller departed the franchise, Orion faced a practical problem beyond recasting. Building a new RoboCop suit from scratch was expensive. Money the financially struggling studio did not want to spend. The solution was to reuse the suit constructed for RoboCop 2, modify it slightly, and put a different actor inside it. Robert John Burke was taller than Weller. The suit had been built to Weller's measurements. Burke wore it anyway and complained throughout the shoot that it was painful after even a short time at the fiberglass pressing and pinching against a body it was never designed to accommodate. Scenes where RoboCop's face appears damaged and then reconstructed were written specifically to explain the physical difference between Weller's appearance and Burke's without the helmet. The story worked around the casting change by giving RoboCop facial reconstruction surgery. The real reason was simpler. Orion couldn't afford to build new hardware for the actor wearing their old hardware. 9. Detroit was actually Atlanta, being demolished for the Olympics. RoboCop 3 is set in Detroit. It was filmed entirely in Atlanta, Georgia. That alone isn't unusual. Plenty of films play the location swap. What makes it specific to this production is where in Atlanta the cameras were rolling. Most of the buildings seen in the film, the decayed streets, the abandoned structures, and the urban collapse that gives the dystopian setting its visual texture, were scheduled for demolition to make way for facilities for the 1996 Summer Olympics. The production was essentially filming in a city in the process of erasing parts of itself for a global event, using the architectural wreckage of that process as a stand-in for a fictional collapsing Detroit. The film's thematic concern with displacement and demolition, OCP forcing residents out of their homes to build something new on top, was being filmed inside a real city doing something uncomfortably similar. The 1996 Olympic construction brought $10 million to the Georgia economy from the production alone. 8. A pirated copy was being sold on the streets of New York before release. In June 1993, 5 months before RoboCop 3 officially opened in North America, illegal copies of the film were being sold for $10 a piece out of a clothing and video store in the Bronx. The FBI investigated. Time coding on the bootleg tapes indicated they had been duplicated from a domestic print used by the studio for editing purposes. Someone with access to a work print had copied it and put it into distribution. The piracy hadn't come from the international releases. Columbia TriStar had already put the film out theatrically in Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, while Orion's bankruptcy proceedings sorted themselves out, but those prints were accounted for. The Bronx copies came from inside the domestic production pipeline. A studio already fighting bankruptcy, already unable to find enough theaters to release the film, found out that New Yorkers had been watching RoboCop 3 in their living rooms for months before the movie officially opened. 7. The video game spoiled the plot before audiences saw the film. The RoboCop 3 tie-in video game was released ahead of the film, not slightly ahead, notably ahead, because Orion's bankruptcy had pushed the theatrical release back by more than a year and nobody had adjusted the licensing timeline to match. The game featured a jetpack-equipped RoboCop on its cover and walked players through significant plot points of the film, including story beats and character outcomes before those audiences had seen the movie. A production delayed by its studio going bankrupt had inadvertently arranged for its own video game to spoil the experience for anyone who played it first. The game itself received poor reviews, a bad game, spoiling a poorly received film for an audience that had already been waiting 2.5 years. RoboCop 3 found a way to underperform at every stage of its commercial existence before a single paying customer had sat down in a theater. 6. Frank Miller based 2 characters on his own comics. Frank Miller didn't just write the screenplay for RoboCop 3, he embedded references to his own work inside it. Otomo, the cyborg samurai assassin sent by the Kanemitsu Corporation to hunt RoboCop, is a direct nod to Miller's comic Ronin, a 1983 series about a masterless samurai whose spirit is reanimated using futuristic biotechnology. The resistance fighter Bertha Washington, played by C.C.H. Pounder, is a reference to Martha Washington, the freedom fighter at the center of Miller's Give Me Liberty series published by Dark Horse Comics. Both characters carry the DNA of Miller's pre-Hollywood graphic novel work, transplanted into a franchise film that stripped out most of what made his writing distinctive. It was Miller leaving traces of himself in a production he was already walking away from, 2 small flags planted in territory he no longer controlled, pointing back to the work he'd done before Hollywood taught him exactly how much of his vision would survive the studio process. 5. The director regrets not killing Lewis differently. Fred Dekker made public his biggest regret about RoboCop 3 years after the film's release. It wasn't the PG-13 rating, though he resented that. It wasn't the budget constraints. It was a creative decision about Nancy Allen's exit. The script killed Lewis. That was non-negotiable, as Allen had made it a condition of her return. What Dekker said he wished he had done was resurrect her, not bring Lewis back as a human, but rebuild her as a RoboCop herself. Dekker said publicly that making Lewis a cyborg, giving her the same transformation Murphy had undergone in the original film, would have justified the movie's existence on its own. It would have been a meaningful extension of the franchise's central premise and a worthy send-off for a character who had been present from the beginning. He had the idea. He didn't execute it. The film ended without it, and Dekker has spent years describing it as the one thing that could have saved the movie from being what it became. 4. RoboCop 3 was the first film to use digital morphing in multiple scenes buried inside a film remembered almost entirely for its failures is a genuine technical landmark. RoboCop 3 was the first theatrical film in history to use digital morphing effects in more than one scene. The morphing technology, which had made a significant impact in films like Terminator 2, Judgment Day, and Michael Jackson's Black or White video, had typically been used as a single showcase moment. RoboCop 3 applied it across multiple sequences, including the Automo robot's transformation effects and several action set pieces. The production was working with a $22 million budget at a time when Jurassic Park was setting a new standard for CGI, with resources that dwarfed what Orion could provide. Within those constraints, the effects team pushed the morphing technology further than it had been pushed before. A film that failed commercially and critically was simultaneously doing something nobody else had done. The technology worked, everything around it didn't. 3. The CEO was supposed to be Bob Morton's father. Fred Dekker had a specific vision for the OCP CEO, played by Rip Torn, that the finished film never communicated. In Dekker's original conception, the CEO was intended to be revealed as the father of Bob Morton, the ambitious OCP executive memorably killed by Clarence Boddicker in the first film after Dick Jones ordered the hit. The connection would have tied the trilogy together with a thread of corporate dynasty and personal tragedy running beneath the corruption. Dekker wanted to cast Jose Ferrer, the legendary stage and screen actor and father of Miguel Ferrer, who had played Morton in the original. He approached the idea with genuine enthusiasm for what it could mean to the franchise's internal continuity. Jose Ferrer was already in declining health and could not take the role. He died a few years later. The CEO became a generic antagonist played effectively by Rip Torn. The dynastic connection was dropped entirely, and the details survived only in the comic book adaptation of the film. 2. RoboCop 3 killed Fred Dekker's directing career. Fred Dekker directed Night of the Creeps in 1986. He directed The Monster Squad in 1987. Both films flopped. Both became cult classics. He directed RoboCop 3 in 1991. It was released in 1993. Got a 4% on Rotten Tomatoes and grossed $10.6 million domestically against a $22 million budget. After that, Dekker did not direct another theatrical film. He worked as an uncredited script doctor on Demolition Man and Lethal Weapon 4. He received no directing credits for over 2 decades. His next writing credit didn't come until The Predator in 2018, 25 years after RoboCop 3 opened and closed. The director, who had made 2 films that audiences later decided they loved, was handed a studio franchise under impossible conditions, delivered exactly what the studio demanded, and was sent to director jail for a quarter-century as the price of it. Night of the Creeps and the Monster Squad survived their original failures. RoboCop 3 was a different kind of damage. Some flops you recover from, some you don't. 1. Peter Weller came in person to explain why he was leaving. When Peter Weller decided he wasn't coming back for RoboCop 3, he could have communicated that through his agent, through the studio, through a publicist. He didn't. He called Fred Dekker and asked to meet. The 2 men sat together for half an hour. Weller explained that he had been campaigning for the lead role in David Cronenberg's adaptation of Naked Lunch, a William S. Burroughs novel he had loved since he was 18 years old. He had wanted that role for years. He had finally gotten it. Filming was scheduled to begin at the same time as RoboCop 3, and the choice was clear. He told Dekker directly he wanted to do RoboCop 3, but he could not pass up Naked Lunch. Dekker later said he was genuinely moved that Weller had come in person rather than letting a phone call handle it. An actor who had spent years in a fiberglass suit that never fit right, who had built a character with his body and his silence, showed enough respect for the director of the film he was abandoning to look him in the eye and explain himself. In a production defined by every institution failing the people involved in it, Peter Weller drove over and told the truth. That was the most professional thing anyone did on RoboCop 3. And there you have it, 15 weird facts about RoboCop 3, a film finished 2 years before it opened, pirated before it premiered, and remembered mostly for everything it wasn't allowed to be. Which hit hardest? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into the films that got away from the people who made them. Until next time.